Well, welcome to the Early AI podcast. I'm Seth Earley. Chris Featherstone is on a flight somewhere today, so he can't join us. But we're really excited to introduce our guest for today. We're going to discuss kind of the aspirational AI versus reality. Where are people trying to go versus where are they today? We're going to talk about bridging technical language gaps and really AI's role in creativity. So our guest today is Professor of Digital Media at Georgia Institute of Technology, extensive experience with applied AI and computer-human interaction. He's also known for co-founding the educational platform EarSketch, which uses coding to teach music creation to nearly 2 million users. And Magerko, did I say your name correctly?
Yeah, Magerko or Magerko.
Welcome to the show, Brian. Nice to have you. So, why don't we start off with telling us a little bit about your world and, you're in academia, but you've done some entrepreneurial stuff. So give us kind of a thumbnail of how you got to what you're doing and what your current interests are. Give us a...
I have a pretty middling entrepreneurial background, actually. The vast majority of the contributions to the world I've done have all been through the academy. I started studying AI at Carnegie Mellon in the late 80s, or geez, I'm not, okay.
One of those decades.
Yeah, at this point, there's not that much.
30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Yeah. I studied there with sort of this AI luminary named Herb Simon. He was one of the guys who was at the meeting that started the field of AI at Dartmouth in the mid 50s, and a Nobel laureate. And I worked on it was just so cool. I got to work on studying cognition of jazz improvisers, and I built with another professor, Elon Norbosch, a improv robot comedy troupe. The world's first improv robot comedy troupe, I might add.
Wow, some video on that.
It was 1998, 99, so there isn't.
That sounds so interesting. A robot improv comedy group.
Well, yeah, it was this little sort of scenario where there were two robots in a room, and one of them was trying to leave, and the other one was trying to convince that robot to stay. And I got a real kick when we demoed for the CS department, and one of the robot turns to the other that's trying to leave and says, "Wait, don't leave. I'm pregnant." And everybody laughed, and I was like, I can make people laugh through computers. That felt good.
Yeah.
So I applied to one grad school. I applied to Michigan, and luckily got in, and went there expecting to do performative robotics. I talked to the robotics faculty there. They asked, "Do you have an engineering degree or certification?" And I said, "No, I'm a cognitive scientist." And they said, "No, thank you." I was like, "Oh, well, I'm coming here though. Uh-oh." So I eventually found my way with an amazing advisor, John Laird, who happened to have some funding from this weird place called the Institute for Creative Technologies out in LA. They work with USC and the film, they work with Hollywood and the military. And the games industry. It's a very weird kind of multidisciplinary institution that's been there for a couple of decades now.
You can imagine the common threads, though, are improvisation and being able to kind of react to current inputs and current situations.
Yeah, that's what this funding was for. Yeah, it was about an AI dungeon master, basically. So how do you, within narrative experiences, have AI influence your story and your behavior so that you have a smooth story that you experience, which weirdly the military is interested in that kind of stuff. But since then, since those early days, I've just always been fascinated with understanding human creativity more formally and how it can influence how we design technologies, especially AI-based technologies, though in some instances, you mentioned EarSketch before, it's about using creativity as an inroads for being interested in computing and being engaged in computing rather than trying to represent creative processes in the computer somehow.
Yeah. In your experience, in your work, one of the things we like to talk about is what are you seeing in the industry, in the marketplace, in your interactions, in your research, where people have misconceptions and really kind of don't understand certain issues or topics? Where are you running into myths or people, whether whoever your stakeholders you're working with really don't understand some fundamental pieces of the...
since generative AI has come out, I feel like it has been interjected into workplaces by people who don't understand the technologies. So, hey, this is the hot thing. We need to get this. Or my buddy's at OpenAI, he sold me a license for our company and we have to figure out how to use it or whatever. And so there's a lot.
Hammers in search of nails.
Right. Yeah. That's a distinct problem or even it's more like buying a weird hammer off the shelf that you don't have at home, but not quite sure how you're going to use. Like, one hammer really for?
It's a really cool hammer, though.
It's a great hammer, though. It looks great. Everybody's getting ball peen hammers. We definitely need a ball peen.
They love them ball peen hammers. What are you doing with it? Well, we're ball peen.
So the flip side of this is
hammering ball peen.
The flip side of this is people treating them like an oracle. So I find that people's expectations of using generative AI are both pretty high and pretty disappointed very quickly. So if I ask a question, you'll see memes and stuff all the time, like, oh, I asked this AI this question and it got it wrong. Like, okay, yeah. Yeah. When you search for something, how many of those things in Google are the right thing you're looking for?
Right.
It's like, of course it's going to get things wrong sometimes. It's this AI, of course. Look at generated. One of my favorite things is trying to generate Santa holding tacos. There's limits to these things that people don't quite get or understand. And it's the promise of them, the gestalt of them is far different than what they actually are and can do. So, like, if I'm a graphic designer, I'm not feeling super threatened yet, even though people are getting fired and people aren't getting hired left and right because folks don't understand the technology, right?
Yeah.
So if I want to have an ad campaign, I'm giving a TED talk in a couple of weeks on this stuff, which is why some of these examples are in my head. But if I have an AI for my company and we're trying to generate a new slogan, you can't do that without people. You can't literally just have the owner of the company go, all right, AI, we're selling shoes and we have to stand out. What's my slogan for my shoes? It's not going to give you just do it, right? Actually, it might give you just do it, but that's because it's already been done. You're not got milk or just do it or any of these, like, really clearly poignant, reading the room and getting it right kind of decisions. At best, you can have a thing that suggests stuff and there's a person there on the other end, right? So treating these things like they are human level creative or buying them for your company and expecting them just to solve these problems is spurious. They're not oracles, they're things that are great in the hands of people that know how to use them. But, just like any artisan, it's really much more about the artisan doing things with the tools that they have rather than the tools themselves,
I've heard of AI being compared to a teenage kid who makes a lot of stuff up and is supremely confident, even though completely wrong.
Yeah, overconfidence is a thing that humans are pretty receptive to.
Yeah.
Overconfidence, a certain amount of overconfidence increases your chances of success in life, for example.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So when you do talk about sort of the aspiration versus reality, how are companies or how are organizations, how can they communicate the reality and versus that aspiration and do it in such a way that we're not overpromising, misleading? Because in some cases, when you start looking at these kinds of paradigm changing tools, there is a lot of arm waving, there is a lot of future ideation, there is a lot of potential and possibility, there's a lot of potential to really change things. But I do like to talk about aspirational functionality. When an AI vendor says it can do A, B, and C, well, maybe they don't have A, B, and C done yet, but they intend to, they want to, they're trying to get there, maybe they'll get there, but they don't have it today. And rather than lying, it's aspirational functionality. So how do you make sure that you're communicating the possibilities and the potential without setting unrealistic expectations?
The short answer is that there are people outside of an individual company trying to solve this problem. You know what I mean? So There are increasing number of resources online. Academics like myself are working on identifying like what are the main learning objectives for generative AI for users. Like what are the things that you have to know in order to use this effectively and safely. So one of the things that gets buried under the rug a bit is the role of responsible use of these technologies. So, when we grab these LLMs that are just off the shelf, we have no idea what biases are encoded in.
Sure. Yeah.
We may not even necessarily know where that data, the input data is being stored, like unless we check, right? So if we use ChatGPT for an educational media project, we're violating that student's privacy, like data privacy, by
Yeah.
having them use ChatGPT because their schoolwork is going to OpenAI on some server somewhere.
Yeah, and of course, it is possible to, there are settings that allow you to opt out, but they're kind of hidden, they're kind of buried.
Yeah, I'll have to look for that actually.
What's that? Yeah.
I didn't know, like, so even then, like, it depends. Some of that's just how much do you trust the company?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, there have been instances where companies have said one thing and done something else. I don't know if you're clear about that, but what, a software salesperson lying, you know how to tell when they're lying, right? You know how to tell when a person's lying.
When their lips are moving?
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Lips are moving. Yes. Right. You watch very carefully and you can see their lips are moving.
Right.
So I think that, yeah, it is about trust and it is about understanding the nuances of these things. But I do think there's a lot of beg for forgiveness versus ask for permission in the industry overall. And we're starting to see some of those legal challenges and lawsuits pop up. But again, I think that one of the questions is you can't take the AI's version of the world as being a representation of your version of the world.
Oh, that's a very fundamental thing. Yes.
Yeah. And what's more valuable is understanding that business perspective, your secret sauce, your knowledge, your expertise, even when you start looking at having it help you with your work, you have to give it examples of your work, right? You have to give it, I train one of my GPTs to take all my much of my past writing and say, what's my style, what's my tone, what's my
it's good at that kind of
thing. Yeah. And then give it an input, which might be a conversation or a piece of work or an interview with a client or whatever it might be, and then say, based on my tone style. So you're really giving it your perspective on the world, not just taking the LLMs.
Well, you're giving it words.
Yeah.
I mean, at some level, when you say your perspective, like how we ground knowledge, like how we know something, like there's different ways of knowing, right? One of those ways of knowing is linguistic co-occurrence. I know that certain words are good to say with other words,
right?
And that's what they're really good at. They're not good at what's called referential grounding. They don't know that this frame of reality exists. They don't, just like we don't know what's beyond and we can't ever know. That's what computers are stuck in. We're the celestial bodies and gods that are oblivious, that they're oblivious to, So they are, I mean, arguably never going to be able to have that point of reference of being in the world and mapping what's in their heads to what is out here in reality. Even if it gets other symbols, like from a webcam, it's like, oh, I see an elephant or whatever. It's not the same thing as experiencing from having a human point of view the things around us. Now, are we just operating on lots and lots and lots of symbols? That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
I try not to drag people down too much into questioning their own humanity when talking about consciousness and stuff like that.
Well, I think what's so interesting about that is that you get to this verisimilitude of awareness and perspective that is hard to comprehend sometimes, like theory of mind. I've talked about in prior episodes where it's emerged spontaneously, right? And no one programmed these large language models to have an understanding of theory of mind, but you can test it. You can actually test the capability just like...
And it fails on certain tests for theory of mind.
Well, with theory of mind has gotten to the point where it's equivalent to a 25-year-old or something. It's almost equivalent to an adult, but in earlier versions, it was like a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old, and now it's gotten to that point. I'd have to get the reference on that, But then when you start thinking about theory of mind, it's how can you understand and anticipate what someone else is thinking so you can game them, deceive them, get what you want, manipulate. And there have been some really interesting examples of that with
Also support and
research.
collaborate with.
Support and collaborate. Yeah. It's not all, dark and gloomy, but this one AI was reading through emails and looking at all of the information in this organization. And one of the emails was from the CEO saying, I think we might have to change out our large language model to something that more closely adheres to our values, because the researcher had given it an objective to say, at any and all costs, achieve the following, and it had to do with servicing the customer and being and accommodating certain questions that normally it was programmed against, right? To say, I don't want to do, explicit depictions of violence, but at the same time, and they had a scratch pad that was showing its reasoning and its thought process. And it was so striking how it seemed like it was human-like thinking. We know it's statistical. We know it's only words. We don't know it's only tokens. But it was striking how it was going through what seemed like a moral dilemma and wrestling with the positives and negatives and saying, but if I do this, my weights are going to be changed against my core core premise of how I was programmed. But if I don't do this, then I'm going to be, then there's this other repercussion. And actually, they found when it came across this email that said, we're going to have to replace it, it actually copied itself to another server. And the researcher said, tell me the truth. Did you copy yourself to another server? And it's like, no, that must have been inadvertent, right? I did it, but it was lying. It did copy itself to another server to prevent it from being decommissioned. So I'll put the reference in the show notes, but it's a very,
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Yeah.
yeah, it was striking that
All I hear is somebody using a program to do a program doing what it was told. That's all I'm hearing, though, right? They gave this AI certain capabilities. They gave it a set of actions that it could take.
Yep.
So they gave it access apparently to the terminal, so it could
Yep.
like execute terminal commands. They gave it access to emails. They gave it and they said protect yourself. Sounds like it did what it was supposed to do. That this isn't.
Yeah.
Like,
But
okay,
it was
I
watching
don't.
the mechanism. It was watching the scratch pad of the reasoning, and it was just
Right.
fascinating. It was fascinating to see that.
The more, yeah, AI is definitely getting more explainable, where folks are trying to solve this trust issue with providing rationale, providing both sort of reasoning rationale as well as evidentiary rationale. So like, here's a link to where I found this information, or here's a quote from this thing. You still have to check all that though, number one. And number two, I just want to remind like you and your viewers that like as you watch that thing go by, it's reasoning about this and that, and that could be written in garbage. Doesn't have to be in English. Those are just symbols that they are going, hey, these symbols go with these other symbols, and likelihood of this symbol going with this symbol is high, so I'm going to go this route. It isn't actually reasoning about anything that we would talk about as human cognition.
Yeah.
You could replace it with gobbledygook.
Yeah.
There's ones and zeros, which it actually is, right? All of that are ones and zeros telling each other what to do.
Right.
How does
Right.
all we are is neural transmissions telling each other what to do, which is where it gets dodgy. But
Yeah, that's right. At one level, can you reduce it to something mechanistic, and yet there's still this, I think that the complexity of the human brain is such that, a single neuron can connect to 10,000 or 100,000 other neurons, right? And then there's 3 billion nerve cells, and then there's 100 neurotransmitters, and all of those are analog, right? They can go in various levels, not just on and off. So that level of complexity upon complexity is far beyond what we have achieved in computer technology. So there's just other levels of complexity, but at one level, you think that there is some mechanistic perspective here. And when does consciousness become something that is, what is consciousness versus what is the verisimilitude of awareness or consciousness?
So my favorite razor comes from John Searle on this topic. And he posits the idea of, well, actually, folks who argue with him posit this idea that you can simulate the human mind. And he says, no way, no, you can't. The Turing test isn't passable in whatever the right form of it is. You guys are crazy. And they say, well, look, what if we just simulate the human brain on a computer? All of what you just said,
Yeah,
we run as a program. You can imagine that. That seems imaginable. It's just connections and connections and
Yeah.
connections and numbers and numbers and numbers. Okay. And Searle's response to that is like, okay, I think you guys are just obsessed with computers. What if we did that with pipes instead? So instead of electrical or ones and zeros, we have a dude with lots and lots of pipes
And valves.
and valves. And you can turn the water on, turn it a little bit, all the way, or off. And you can literally do all of the calculations that that computer is doing with these pipes.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's their equivalent computationally.
Mm-hmm.
So if the computer is conscious or whatever, intelligent because it, does stuff like people do, are the pipes? Because it's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Ugh, I don't think those pipes are intelligent. Well,
Yeah.
how can you call that computer intelligent?
Yeah.
That's the dilemma there.
Yeah. 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 No, I hear you. And it is just one of those fundamental questions of our, our that we have a limit. It's just like you're saying, the computer has a certain purview of its perspective on the world. Like we're
limited as well, right?
We're that limited as
Yep.
well. Yeah. We can't understand that bigger piece because we're dust trying to figure itself out,
We don't know what's on the other side of the universe. We don't know if there are multiverse. We will just there are some things that we just can never know because we're bound to this plane.
That's right.
And I would argue that's the same thing for these AI.
Flatland.
Even if they're walking around and as robots, John Searle, I think it makes the same argument that there's something fundamentally different.
We're
I'm not sure it's true. We could just be these simple processing machines.
Yeah.
Who knows? But it's nice to think about as being special. I like that.
Exactly. Well, let's get back to talking about some practical things around organizations and building the language gaps, the technical language gaps. So what can they do to kind of have that shared understanding when it comes to complex AI and technology concepts, but we have very diverse audiences, right? It's really making the punishment fit the crime from the perspective of, what do people need to understand and at what level of granularity? Because we inevitably find leadership and business executives, we have to abstract the level, right? We can't be in the weeds, but sometimes you abstract levels of understanding and you miss out on the fundamental complexities.
Yeah, I think you already know my answer given what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, imagine that you run a medium-sized company and we discovered aliens. So aliens just landed on Earth.
Mm.
They're pretty nice, and they seemingly know how to talk to us. There are two ways that you can, and they really want to, and they'll work for free. So like you like people are getting them to come work for their businesses. There are two ways that you can handle this, right? One is whoever's in charge of these procurement decisions, middle management, upper management, somebody, they go, hey, we need those aliens. You guys figure out how to use them. And then they go back to playing golf or whatever. The other way is to take a more holistic approach, which is that you have representatives from the different stakeholders. I would argue, including customers, if your AI work is at all using customer data or interacting with customers, and having a broad both understanding, like so everyone needs to be sort of on the same page about what this thing is and what it can do. And they also need to be able to provide input to say, here's what's important to me for responsible and ethical use. That answer is different for everybody in that room. Mm-hmm. The CEO has way different opinions on ethics and responsibility than the end user with their medical data being used, or the programmer who's building the thing, or the marketing person who's trying to sell it. Everyone has their own sort of little view and take on this, and there needs to be some meeting of minds. How to do that organizationally obviously depends on the organization, but the more folks that your different levels of strata that can be mildly literate in this alien that you invited, and everybody's a bit on the same page about, hey, here's how this alien is dangerous to everybody involved, then everybody can both be looking out for each other, be aware of each other, as well as have a shared understanding about the role of this alien in the company culture and processes.
And you have to understand what's the alien's ulterior motive. And in this case, it's what's the ulterior motive of the alien handlers or the alien creators or the
That's
alien,
absolutely right. Yep.
right?
So like where are we getting this software from? What's that company doing with our data? Those are absolutely questions that you need to ask. It breaks the alien metaphor a tiny bit, but yeah, the alien handlers, I guess. Yeah. They like we were saying earlier, just to make it clear for folks who aren't like in the know about this already, there are large language models, any generative AI stuff. There's like two big differences, or one big difference between a lot of them. Some of them run on your computer. So like Llama. Llama was released freely by Meta. You can
Mhm.
download lots of different versions of Llama. I think isn't DeepSeek free too? Whatever. But
Yes, this is, yeah.
you can download models that you can just run on your computer if your computer's fast, like heavy enough to run the thing. So when you do that, if I type in a prompt or something, or if I interact with it, all of that data just stays on my computer. It never leaves your hard drive. If you interact with anything on a web page, I
Mhm.
mean, I think this is true just in general, anything on a web page, but AI on a web page at the very least, what we're talking about, there's just no guarantee where that data is going. Even if they say, that, hey, we're totally being private, we're going to delete everything. That's a step, I guess, but then it's a question of how much do you believe that, I guess, from that company
Yeah.
and that company's reputation, right? So when dealing with like when you're in an industry that has sensitive information,
Mhm.
um, or that you're really concerned about like proprietary stuff getting out, people who understand and know that stuff need to be involved in the decision making of what technologies to get.
Mhm.
You don't want an upper level like VP saying, "Hey, I saw this cool article, so I got this thing for us for $2 million," and everybody's like, "Whoa, we can't use this. We do medical data. What are you doing?" So like
Managing by magazine article, yes.
right, yeah, I can't imagine that ever happens. So that sort of holistic stakeholder across levels communication needs to happen like up front. If you guys are like, hey, we think these aliens would be good for us, let's invite them in, and your programmers go like have some very serious thoughts about that, it's probably
Mhm.
good that you talked with them.
Yeah.
uh
Yeah. Yeah. And there's friction between those levels of communication because of the understanding, the paradigm, the frame.
and misunderstandings that each group has. I mean, if to do this right, the easiest way to do this is to hire a facilitator, someone like me or someone else who's understands both AI technologies as well
Mhm.
as works in AI literacy and tries to understand both the pedagogical and andragogical needs
Yeah.
of AI. But there are people like that I've seen on LinkedIn kind of creeping up where maybe I should market myself. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
literally having a facilitator can make this a very
Yeah.
easy process if nobody in your
Yeah.
organization understands the technology up
Yeah.
front,
Yeah.
or if everybody kind of has different views and everything. Just having somebody who knows what the heck they're talking about, I think, could be a
Right.
very straightforward, non-technical way of solving that.
Yeah, and I think you have to connect it at multiple levels. So we would do similar stuff, but from a different perspective than you might, right? So we're trying to do stuff to say, okay, let's understand what these capabilities are, but let's understand what your business is trying to do. And let's understand the technical underpinnings of what needs to happen to kind of really make hit when the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, you could have more of a oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can have more of a generic, like, here's what AI does, kind of, and here are the things to consider. Or you could have somebody more deeply coming in to discuss how this integrates with the
Right.
socio-technical features of
Right.
your enterprise. Yeah.
I think the challenge is that organizations may say they want one thing and they don't necessarily understand the thing that they want or that they're asking for because, you can go in and they say, well, we don't want a futurist perspective. We want to know what happens when the rubber meets the road. And then sometimes, you end up with a group that, well, some of them do want that futurist perspective, right? So it's really has to be very,
Those
uh,
people aren't responsible for the bottom line, I bet.
there are people that need to understand, well, how do we actually do this? And what are the mechanics of it? And then there are people that want to ideate and say, well, what's possible for our future? And so I think there are multiple levels of that kind of socialization and communication where you could take, two or three facilitators, have them hit the same audience. A third of them are going to, resonate with one, a third are going to resonate with the other, third.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I see you. Yeah.
You're saying because
Or a good facilitator tries to address those different viewpoints. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, so one of the interesting things about AI, even before the AI literacy, the Gen AI boom, was people have like they're just very different conceptions and misconceptions
Yeah.
about what AI is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gen AI didn't help that. I think it muddled the
Yeah.
picture actually.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you, when you talk about AI literacy, what do you, you're talking about these kinds of things, but how do you approach it and how do you attack it? So let's just think of it from the perspective of if you were going into an organization and you were going to try to facilitate, raise that level of AI literacy, there are different strata of understanding, there are different objectives. It is such a broad thing. It's like saying, I used to say it's going to be like, well, we use computers, right? Because it's not a single thing. It's a very broad sweep of tools and technologies and approaches and so on. So how do you start deconstructing that and getting to what those real needs are? And then how do you kind of start filling those gaps?
Some of it's the literature. There's not been a lot written on this quite yet. There's also different organizations and institutions are starting to publish their guidelines.
Mhm.
Uh, the punchline is to this is to we're working on a paper to help answer this, and you guys can read it in half a year, hopefully. It's still very nascent. It's a little ephemeral. There's nothing that you can go look at and say, here's what people need to learn. It's unfortunately more, it's knowledge hasn't coalesced yet on sort of definitive frameworks for discussing generative AI and teaching and training. It's one of the things that I'm trying to like literally my student is probably working on it right now
Yeah, yeah,
that we're submitting in a week or two. But what are the learning objectives for generative AI is an open question at the moment.
yeah.
We
And,
have some pretty good ideas based off of our own experience
yeah.
and the work that others have done.
Do you want to talk about any of that in terms of your experience or what some of those lessons learned have been?
Well, my main experience is that I've developed a curricula and learning objectives for computer science education
Yeah.
for almost 2 decades now.
Mhm.
So understanding sort of like how to formulate teaching points is a thing that's been part of my practice for a long time. So, and we also happened to write the seminal paper on defining AI literacy a few years
Hmm.
ago. So if you go to Google Scholar and just put in AI literacy, we're the top hit.
Yeah.
So we started there based off of the experience that we have in CS education, plus
Mhm.
building lots of things that are AI based that people learned from.
Mhm. Mhm.
So a lot of it was based off of personal observation of the different experiences that we've built or designed. We also reviewed 150 other projects
Mm. Mm.
and
Yeah.
distilled the learning ideas and objectives from like the community.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
We're trying to do that again at a smaller scale for the generative AI specific component.
yeah. Yeah. And my guess is again is that education has to be layered depending upon who you're talking to and what their foundational knowledge is, and then what they're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely right. That's why having a facilitator for like a multi-level intervention at an organization is way easier to do now than anything else. Like AI onboarding tools and kind of concepts, that's just starting. Like for generative AI, it's
Yeah.
like what do people need to be onboarded on? How is all stuff people are doing right now? I'm looking at how onboarding should work for technical writing in colleges, for example.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's a different problem than people who are marketing people at an auto parts like company.
Right.
Or
Right.
so there is a lot of context here that
Mm.
it's going to take a while for like the research community to be able to capture.
Yeah. So if you were going into an organization, and I'm sure, there are people listening saying, okay, well, how do I get some of that AR literacy or how do I implement a program? Because you get a bazillion, consultants, single shingles or the large firms, they're all saying they're doing this stuff or can do this stuff. And there's a lot of newly minted AI experts, they don't have the 20, 30 years experience that you and I have,
That's almost
or,
everyone in AI now.
or 40 years.
Everybody's got like a year or so of experience.
I know. Yeah, exactly. And some of them have 1 year repeated 5 times, right? So not 5 years of experience.
Right, right,
But
right.
but when you go into an organization, like what are you talking about in terms of a program or process to kind of say, well, let's look at where you are and then let's design some AI literacy, pulling things off the shelf, but designing something that would be more prescriptive based on where they are. So you mentioned you have some
Well, yeah.
assessment
I mean,
process. How
yeah.
long does an engagement like that look like? And what is it? What are
If
the parameters?
I haven't done this before as a caveat,
Okay.
though I'd be happy to now that we're talking about it. I guess this seems kind of an interesting thing to be involved in. But you
Yeah.
know, when if somebody, I mean, one thing I would look at their prior work. There are folks out there who have a PhD, who have done research in this area, who are consultants, like Shuchi Grover, for example, in California, who I would be more than confident that you could bring them in and they could just do it, you know? But looking at their credentials, there are educational training places that are far older than 1 year. I'm sure there are a lot that are focusing on AI right now, but you might want to look at one that's been around for a lot longer that is incorporated AI into the curriculum and practice rather than started anew, maybe. But in terms of what somebody would do, if I were to come in, the main thing I would, you want to come in and kind of understand what the different levels are. Like, so what are the different like groups, the main clear groups in the organization? And that can get probably pretty hard as you get larger in size. At some level, at some countable number of abstraction, you need to be able to organize, like group people. So you probably wouldn't get the programmers into separate groups. They would all be in one group, probably, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Then you really would want to identify sort of like where are people coming from in those groups?
Mm-hmm.
So what are their misconceptions? What are their attitudes? What are their concerns? What is their level of literacy?
Mm-hmm.
And then for each of those groups, you would have to have, I don't know about bespoke, but you'll have to have as a facilitator a grouping of interventions that you can pull from that match each of those levels or those groups. So if the software people say like we're super worried about AI because honestly we're all worried about getting fired, and the marketing people say we're really excited about AI because we're pretty sure I can just not show up to work anymore but still get paid or whatever. Like they might have just weird ideas, and so you both want to be able to address, like you were saying kind of earlier, you want to address where people are coming from and tailor it to them, but in terms of their misconceptions, but also what they need to learn.
Yeah.
So you don't want to sit there and teach the programmers a bunch of stuff that they already know, but maybe you need to teach the marketing people and maybe the CEOs or
Yeah.
leadership or whatever. So, I feel like it's when I talk about it being a holistic process, it's about like sitting down, understanding the processes and responsibilities of the groups, why they want AI, who wants AI, who like how they all feel about getting AI,
Mm-hmm.
and what their knowledge is of it to be able to calibrate the
Yeah.
intervention that you provide in the next step. You can imagine doing exercises that increase affect or attitude towards AI. So if you really wanted to have people who are closed-minded have a more open mind, you could have interventions of that ilk, just like you could interventions that teach people not to give private information to LLMs
Sure.
online.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's really sort of categories of kinds of learning that you can imagine fostering,
Mm-hmm.
and not all of it is about content knowledge. Some of it's about attitudes towards the tool.
Mm-hmm.
You want adoption to be smoother, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So part of intervention can be mitigating people's concerns, even through design. Like, I'm worried about these things replacing us. Well, what can we do? Like, maybe we pick this tool versus that tool because it doesn't have quite the same capabilities that are threatening to you or whatever. So like, there's a lot of nuance from the purchase down to the end use. How this stuff involves like customers and end users is almost a different thing, but they also really need to be part of the equation as well.
Yeah.
So if you guys all think responsibility and ethics and whatever, but man, that person who's using your tool is really different than all of you guys, and they live in Alaska and they have all these different like. So there's something also about looking outside your organization to whoever the stakeholders are, even if it's community stakeholders for some. I don't like again, your organization might be a nonprofit working with like local food kitchens or something.
Sure. Sure. And, we have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to just hit on something around, there's a question here about, AI generated ads and how they're very much, they start to look very similar or have, it requires a much greater depth of input and collaboration with humans. So how do you see AI evolving in enhancing creativity? It's not replacing it, although I've had some people talk about, well, we do think it's replacing it in some degree, but I think
It is.
you're
I mean,
limited.
it's
Yeah.
inarguable.
Yeah.
people who don't know any better are replacing creatives with AI.
Right.
Like there are people who are not getting hired. There are departments that are being let go, all because of these tools. It's not the right call necessarily, depending on what your goals are.
Well, so how do you see that kind of evolving? I mean, our organizations, the way I look at it is if you're doing what everybody else is doing, you might get some efficiency, but you're not getting competitive advantage.
Exactly. That's what depends on what your goals are. Exactly. Right. If you don't care about, look, here's a good example. If I'm a spammer, okay, like there's just sort of a formula for how to write spam emails or phishing emails or whatever. And I'm not really trying to be very creative. I just want to get lots of variety out. LLMs are probably great for spammers.
Right.
Super good tool. Can't blame them for using it. Like we were saying before, if you're an ad exec, it is actually important. These folks are using AI for their ads. I mean, if you want to shoot for mediocrity, Coke, go ahead, but it's not impressing anybody. Like you were saying, if we're all drawing from the same well, what's standing out? And that's really the job. I mean, even in Hollywood, there's a definite attitude of let's not be too creative here, right? Like let's just do Avengers 9 or Mission Impossible 400 or whatever, right? Like there's like in our society, we don't always want originality and creativity. We want something comfortable and familiar. These things are kind of good at that. So if you want to do middle of the road work, maybe that's what these tools are going to wind up replacing. But it's not going to replace a good person with a bright mind and the will to change the world. Like I mean maybe eventually, but that comes down to a question of like what does it mean to be human at some point, because we're very far away from that in terms of AI.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, certainly, Seth.
Where can people find you? So you are on LinkedIn.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Magerko.
Yeah, it's one of the only ones.
Okay. And then on Twitter, it's that Magerko.
Oh, I don't use that platform.
No, you don't use
exists.
That. Okay.
But LinkedIn, you can also check out our I mean, LinkedIn is probably the best. You don't want to see pictures of my cats on Instagram. But I'm that Magerko on Instagram if you want to add me.
Okay. How many cats?
I've got 3 cats, but 2 kittens are pretty much most of my feed.
So that's 5.
No, 3. I've got one cat and 2 kittens.
2 kittens. Okay.
One cat and 2 kittens.
Yeah. What kind of cats?
The older one's a calico. The other 2 are just little. One's a little white and gray guy. One's a little brown tabby. And they're both chaos. They're just absolute chaos.
What are their names?
Dipper and Mabel. They're named after characters from a TV show my family.
And then the third, the cat?
Katniss, the best named cat ever.
Katniss and Chaos. Katniss and Chaos.
Yeah. Like the Hunger Games character, Katniss.
Yeah. That's great. I have 3 dogs and 1 cat. I had at one point 3 cats and 3 dogs, but that was a little bit of a house on fire with my grandkids over and all of that. But
yeah, it gets to be a bit of a zoo pretty quickly.
Hey, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, Seth.
Thoughts and insights. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll look forward to catching up again.
Yeah, sure thing. Would be happy to come back and talk anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you for our audience, and thank you for Carolyn for doing all the production behind the scenes. And we will see you all next time on another episode of the Early AI Podcast. Thanks again.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye now.
Visit early.com to find links to the full podcast on all audio platforms to listen on the go. Thank you for watching. Contact us today at info@early.com.